Christ, Almighty God. Amen and amen.
Struggle is what we do.
Civil War!
Remember, we had a civil war in the 1860s.
We may not even make it to next month. This documentary might not be released. You can't manipulate the American population anymore.
Okay, so first of all, Trump's a liar.
He's an embarrassment to the United States.
Would you like to answer some questions about the Trump's hush money case?
No.
We are entering a pre-revolutionary period.
Kamala Harris is fighting corporate greed. Are you for real?
Kind of wish I was born at a different time, but...
Have you been to our southern border?
No.
It's open.
We are going to start the largest mass deportation in the history of our country. It's a disgusting, disgraceful business.
American dream, I think, is something of the past.
MAGA means restoring the American dream. Woke culture is a virus.
You know, we have to stay woke. Like, everybody needs to be woke.
Well, I don't want to vote for a tyrannical regime. I switch sides.
And when nobody starts trusting the results either way, civil war.
We're going to see more of what we saw in 2020.
I mean, these people, in my opinion, are traitors to the nation.
Like you, and you.
That's America dream.
Hallo alle zusammen, hier ist Pascal von Neutrality Studies, heute wieder mal auf Deutsch.
Hello everyone, this is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, today once again in German, because I have with me Tunç Akkoç, the editor-in-chief of Harici, a digital media organization in Turkey, and Tunç is a wonderful German speaker. That's why we're having our conversation in this language today, but we're talking about a film that will also be released on our channel in English. Tunç has made a very impressive film about the USA called Awakening from the Dream. We want to talk about his work, the film, and the situation in the USA today. Tunç, welcome.
Die Situation in den USA wollen wir heute sprechen. Tunç, willkommen.
Hello, thank you. Thank you, Pascal, for the invitation.
Ja, ich danke dir, denn du hast dich bei mir gemeldet, weil du gesagt hast, du hast...
Yes, thank you, because you reached out to me saying you produced a film here and are now looking for ways to broadcast it. And of course, I'm very happy to help you with that for our audience. We were connected through Ulrike Guerreau, who is currently initiating various wonderful actions, including connecting her networks. Tunç, can you tell us something about yourself and the media organization you now lead? Harici? Where do you work? How do you work? What is your motivation?
Erzählen, wo arbeitet ihr, wie arbeitet ihr, was ist eure Motivation?
Ja, gerne. Also wir verfolgen ja deinen Kanal und
Yes, gladly. So we follow your channel and your interviews, and then I thought when we made this film, we'll talk about it shortly, we could get in touch and maybe do a program, and you could also publish the film because Neutrality Studies is doing really well. We follow almost all the interviews you publish. As you said, we are a digital media organization. Harici has been running for about 2 years, and we report exclusively on foreign policy and international events. This is not so common in the media landscape, not even in Turkey. There is hardly any media organization that reports exclusively on foreign policy. We report in 2 languages, not only in Turkish, but also in English.
Wir berichten in 2 Sprachen, nicht nur auf Türkisch, sondern auch auf Englisch. Deswegen haben wir auch ein Publikum außerhalb der Türkei.
That's why we also have an audience outside of Turkey. Besides our website, where we publish exclusive interviews with ministers from various countries, or experts like Jeffrey Sachs or Alexander Rahr from Germany, who come to mind right now, or other experts, but of course also special news and reports, a pretty dynamic website. On the other hand, we have intensive video production work. We also have our own YouTube channel, and we actually produce documentaries. Long documentaries, about 30, 40, 50 minutes long, I can say, in the last 2.5 years, 3 or 4 per year, on various topics. And the last film we produced is actually about the political and social situation in the USA and about the US elections. But we'll get to that later.
Politische und soziale Lage in den USA und über die US-Wahlen, aber dazu kommen wir ja noch.
Genau, darüber sprechen wir gleich.
Exactly. We'll talk about that in a moment. Tell me a bit more about the motivation behind creating this new media organization in Turkey. Isn't there enough in Turkey already? You mentioned that you are the only ones focusing on foreign policy. In Western media, it's relatively bad, with a uniformity of perspectives. What does the media landscape in Turkey look like?
Wie sieht denn die Medienlandschaft in der Türkei aus?
Gute Frage. Also es gibt ein paar Aspekte. Erstens, in der Türkei gibt
Good question. So there are a few aspects. Firstly, in Turkey, there aren't actually many alternatives. Alternative media organizations that report on foreign policy or international events in such a profound, detailed, or high-quality manner. Something like, for example, foreign policy in the USA or Middle East. So such websites or media organizations that exclusively focus on foreign policy don't actually exist in Turkey. That's why we hear from many experts, many people who deal with this after these 2 years that we've been doing this work here, that they say we've filled this gap here in Turkey. Secondly, we are indeed ambitious in the media sector to truly present and convey events objectively.
Geschehnisse wirklich objektiv darzustellen, weiterzuleiten. Und auf der einen Seite ist natürlich, wissen wir ja alle heutzutage, ist es viel einfacher.
On one hand, it's obviously much easier nowadays to access information, thanks to digitalization. But on the other hand, there's an enormous amount of disinformation in the world, probably more than ever before. My colleagues and I are part of a team that works intensively day and night, consisting of about 10 people who are young but experienced in this field, fluent in foreign languages like English, Arabic, Korean, Chinese, and so on, including Russian, and who keep track of global events. Our ambition was to do something ambitious, to become the leading media organization in Turkey in this regard, and gradually to become a well-known brand and media organization worldwide.
Ja, eine bekannte Marke, eine Medienorganisation zu werden.
Da hoffe ich, dass ihr gut weiterkommt damit. Also ihr macht ja jetzt auch schon.
I hope you make good progress with that. You're already doing big productions now. Let's talk about the film, Awakening from the Dream. You sent me the trailer, you provided me with the content of the film, and you made a documentary here, a very beautifully and high-quality crafted documentary about the socio-political situation in the USA. You interviewed many people for it, people who have also been on this channel. You had Jess Freeman involved. I think he's the only one. Because the other one I saw is Finkelstein, Norman Finkelstein. Unfortunately, I haven't had him yet, but I congratulate you on getting to him. A great expert, of course, on the whole. The genocide of the Palestinians. It's nothing else, over decades. You interviewed all of them and tried to capture the tensions in the country as well. How did you come to start such a project, and how long did it take?
Wie seid ihr dazu gekommen, so ein Projekt zu starten, und wie lange hat das gedauert?
Also die Idee war ja halt, dass tatsächlich im
The idea was that indeed in October and November, everyone in the world would be talking about the elections. That's why we planned at the beginning of the year to do it. The idea was to film in the USA at the end of August or beginning of September, because earlier would have been too soon, as the campaigns, etc., actually started in September. And that's why we were in the USA at the beginning of September. The plan was to film for about 10 to 15 days, but in the end it turned out to be a month in total.
Film, aber das waren dann insgesamt am Ende ein Monat. Also ich war selber persönlich mit einem Kollegen.
I was personally with a colleague, a USA expert from Turkey, a young colleague of mine, also from ARDG, in the USA for about 4 weeks, as I said, mainly in New York and Washington, D.C., but we also traveled to Philadelphia, Rhode Island, we're in Los Angeles, and even accredited at a Trump event in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. We got around quite a bit. As you mentioned, we interviewed very interesting personalities who shared their perspectives from different angles. We interviewed Democrats, for example, Jonathan Weider, who was John Kerry's closest associate for many years and also Deputy Secretary of State, Special Envoy in Libya, and an experienced Democrat, for instance.
Und ein erfahrener Demokrat zum Beispiel. Aus seinem Blickwinkel haben wir einiges aufgenommen in die Doku.
From his perspective, we included quite a bit in the documentary. We then interviewed and observed the Trump supporters, young people from the Young Republican Club in New York, whom we interviewed and talked to, but also, above all, intellectual experts, renowned people like Norman Finkelstein and Jess Freeman, who are really experienced and can objectively assess the situation. In addition to that, of course, also citizens on the street. Every day we tried to really capture voices on the street, and then of course it wasn't easy to develop a concept from hours of material in a short time.
Stundenlanges Material, daraus ein Konzept herauszustellen in kurzer Zeit, aber ich denke, dass es uns gelungen ist.
But I think we succeeded in presenting the situation. It was really very difficult to show everything in 35 minutes. We had maybe 20 hours of material, the interviews and so on. But I think we managed to reach people, especially those who don't really know the situation in the USA very well. It is indeed a very interesting and also unusual country. From that, we crafted a concept. The interesting thing is that in many films and documentaries, you have a narrator, a storyteller in front of the camera, or one you don't see.
Kamera oder den sieht man nicht, du hast einen Narrator. Wir haben das diesmal versucht, ohne einen Narrator zu machen.
We tried this time to work without a narrator. That was quite difficult because, in the end, it should be easy for the viewer to watch the film. It should be like a movie, like a feature film. But yes, I'm curious about the reaction, and I think we succeeded, and that's actually more objective than if I or someone else were constantly narrating and commenting throughout the film. And yes, I'm curious about the viewers' reactions.
Und ja, ich bin gespannt auf die Reaktion der Zuschauer.
Das werden wir sehen, weil wir werden den Film veröffentlichen hier 1 oder 2 Tage nachdem wir.
We'll see, because we're going to release the film a day or 2 after we publish this interview with you. Hopefully still over the weekend, right before the elections. The film is called Awakening from the Dream, and the thumbnail you sent me shows Kamala Harris and Donald Trump standing back to back, both seemingly dreaming upwards. From what dream are the two of them awakening? Or from what dream is the USA currently awakening?
Oder von welchem Traum erwacht die USA im Moment?
Das ist der berühmte amerikanische Traum halt.
This is the famous American dream. The documentary actually reports on the fate of the American dream. In the end, we decided to name it that way because in the film, you see, although we didn't use it very often, only in a few places, we actually heard it very often from people, from experts, but also from citizens, even though we didn't directly ask or inquire about it. The American dream is dead.
Von Experten, aber auch von Bürgern, der amerikanische Traum ist tot. Das haben wir tatsächlich selber von sich ausgesagt und das war schon interessant, weil
We actually heard that from them ourselves, and it was quite interesting because it's so famous and such an exciting legend, like the American dream and so on. But the America we saw was really far from that. So people in the USA today are actually far from realizing their dreams. Instead, people are much more focused on their problems, on discussions, on conflicts, on divisions, and on contradictions.
Die Spaltung und auf die Widersprüche.
Und wie hast du denn das erfahren?
And how did you find out that the USA is a divided country? I mean, the talk of a divided country, I think you can apply that to almost any country. And then you find divisions and dissatisfaction. And in Turkey, there would be various ways to talk about something like that, also in Switzerland or Japan. So divisions are normal. But the USA is currently at a point where we really have to ask ourselves, how will this continue socially? The most powerful country in the world, the richest country in the world, and yet millions of people below the poverty line. And I also believe, from what I perceive from the outside, a deep dissatisfaction with how society functions internally, and now again, this polarization between the Republicans and the Democrats. What have you noticed about this?
den Republikanern und den Demokraten. Was ist dir dazu aufgefallen?
Also ich würde sagen, obwohl ich natürlich nicht alle Länder auf der Welt.
Well, I would say, although I haven't seen all the countries in the world, if we're talking about the Western countries, or the countries that stand out globally, I would say the USA is the most divided country in the world. I'm also a German Turk. I grew up in Germany. I know Europe quite well. I often travel towards Asia and so on. My personal opinion is that the USA is indeed the most divided country in the world. Many people, actually several, not just one, have commented that we are currently experiencing the strongest polarization in the States since the Civil War in the 1860s.
Seit dem Bürgerkrieg in den 1860er Jahren. Also das war schon sehr interessant, weil
That was very interesting because not only people on the street but also experts said, okay, we experienced a lot during the Vietnam War era in this country, but what we are experiencing now is something entirely different. That's why it was quite impressive. Of course, what are the reasons? Primarily economic. The gap between rich and poor has probably never been as large as it is today. To give a spoiler, the famous, one of the most influential political scientists in the world, Norman Finkelstein, is mostly interviewed about the Eastern conflict, about Gaza, Israel, etc.
über den Ostkonflikt, über Gaza, Israel und so weiter interviewt natürlich, wissen alle, aber Norman Finkelstein ist sehr
But Norman Finkelstein is a very influential American intellectual. His latest book was also about the culture war in the USA. And our request was also because we are making a film about the USA, that this time we actually, although we would like to, of course not talk about Gaza, but about the USA. And the interview was also quite interesting. So I also follow almost every interview with Norman Finkelstein. Almost all are exclusively about Gaza. That's why I think it will be very interesting to observe his opinion.
dass das auch sehr interessant beobachtet wird, seine Meinung halt. Und eine Sache war sehr beeindruckend.
And one thing was very impressive. Norman said in an interview that 3 people in our country, 3, like you and you, we were just 3 in the room, possess more wealth than more than half of the country. That is the reason for the polarization, the real reason. Of course, there are phenomena, various things, the culture war and so on, we might get to that now, but the real reason is, of course, economic. Added to that is the culture war. But there is indeed, perhaps you can't talk about it like this in every country, a culture war happening in the USA. There is currently no value system that unites the nation.
Mittlerweile Wertvorstellungen, die die Nation vereint. Das ist eigentlich das ist das, was mit Kulturkampf gemeint ist.
This is what is meant by culture war. And of course, identity politics is the cause of it. And when we say identity politics, we always think of the woke culture, which is really very dominant, very widespread in the USA, also in government circles. And if you make politics based on gender, skin color, and origin, you end up with a divided country. But on the other hand, this is also an important message of our film. Republicans also engage in identity politics. That's why political life in the country actually revolves around identity politics. And that's essentially what we call a culture war. I have one last comment on that.
Kommentar. Ich habe mir überlegt, auch dort in den USA, wo ich das alles beobachtet habe.
I have thought about it, even there in the USA, where I have observed all of this. Precisely because of what I have just described, this culture war, the USA can no longer lead the world. They no longer have a value system to offer the world. Of course, there are economic issues and other reasons for this, but I also experienced the 80s and 90s, and America was always a country that had a value system to offer the world, so to speak. They no longer believe in their own system. So that's another point, the crisis of American democracy. That's why I think it can be assessed, as I just said, this culture war is tearing the country apart and also somewhat dividing the politics.
Reißt das Land und bringt auch so ein bisschen die Politik auseinander.
Das ist eine sehr interessante Beobachtung, dass diese
That is a very interesting observation, that the USA is now not only making enemies, but also losing friends, both left and right. The entire global South, which isn't turning away in the sense of wanting nothing more to do with it, but simply wants to be left in peace, and now refuses to continue participating in this globalization a la westernization, a la Americanization. Isn't that actually a mistake in foreign policy? Of course, it's a mistake in foreign policy and vision, but you say this comes from a domestic political vacuum, where there's nothing behind these empty phrases anymore. There is no real ideological leadership or anything left to sell. There's simply nothing there anymore. Is that so?
Auf jeden Fall. Das ist auf jeden Fall so. Das ist in einer Hinsicht auch.
That is definitely the case. In a way, I think it's not bad for the world, because this whole imagination is also over. A prominent professor described it this way when he talked about Trump. He said that Trump probably undermines this US policy. And that might not be bad for the world, as he put it. That's actually the case. So now, if the Democrats who are currently governing the country talk about various things internationally, like democracy, freedom, and so on, you have to ask, half of the country, meaning the states, doesn't agree with them at all.
Die Staaten stimmt mit ihm gar nicht zu. Oder überein, quasi. Also, das ist nicht mehr.
Or almost agree. So that no longer convinces. A country experiencing such a culture war really doesn't have much to say to the world. My observation is that it will be quite difficult for the USA to overcome this polarization. That's also a bit of my observation. An important expert said, and it was very impressive, that the form of government in the USA, that is the government system, promotes the conflict in the USA. It is indeed quite different from Germany, Europe, Turkey, or other countries.
Also es ist ja tatsächlich ziemlich anders als Deutschland, Europa, Türkei oder andere Länder. Das fördert, also deswegen besitzen die Menschen auch dort. Also
so that's why people there also own, it's still a cultural aspect, but they own weapons, and the whole system is quite different, and so on. That promotes the fight. Fight is what we do. That's a very important point. So, there are even rumors he might become Trump's national security advisor if Trump wins, and so on. So that was his assessment. He also drew parallels to 1860 Civil War and so on. It's not that far off, less than 200 years. That's why I think it will be quite difficult for the USA to overcome this polarization. What it will lead to, I don't know, but it will be quite difficult.
Wozu es kommen wird, das weiß ich nicht, aber es wird ziemlich schwierig sein.
Ja, ich teile diese Ansicht auch.
Yes, I share this view as well. The political system in the USA with its two parties is not based on the fact that people only like these two parties. It is due to how people vote. So, if you have a first-past-the-post system, a majoritarian system where simply the majority party that wins then receives all the seats in a district, you create a two-party system from the logic of how the voting works. It's the same in the United Kingdom. And it only depends on how you count the votes. If you counted votes differently and reserved seats in each electoral district for different parties, you would automatically have a multi-party system. Then 2, 3, 4 other parties would sit in the capital. The presidential elections would again be a question of how that would work.
Die Präsidentenwahlen wären wieder eine Frage, wie das funktionieren würde, aber es würde
But it would actually change the whole system if it was simply a proportional system. But it isn't. And the current parties also have no interest in changing that, because they can only lose if other parties were to come in. That's why there are many people in the USA who talk about the uniparty, meaning the unified party, simply divided into two factions, Republicans and Democrats, but they actually belong to the same mix, which is often referred to by certain sides as the swamp or whatever, although that refers more to the bureaucrats, the permanent state, which remains even when the politicians change. But it all kind of comes together in this discussion. Did you encounter that a lot during your research or while filming?
Ist dir das auch viel untergekommen während den Recherchen oder während den Filmaufnahmen?
Ja, also sehr, sehr guter Punkt. Teile ich auch 100% mit.
Yes, a very, very good point. I completely agree. As I said, we interviewed various personalities, including experts who of course do not belong to both parties, but also independent candidates. a young man, an academic who is part of Progressive International, a very well-known NGO worldwide. He was one of those who must also be called independent, alongside Professor Norman Finkelstein and Chess Freeman, who were actually the main figures, I think. The documentary also featured people like Professor Emmanuel Ness from New York, and also, as mentioned, independent candidates from the Bronx and New York. Jose Vega is also a famous activist by now. They actually emphasized what you just said. And by the way, there's also a famous journalist. A journalist.
Übrigens noch ein berühmter Journalist, die Herkunft ist aus.
His origin is from Turkey, but he is an American in Los Angeles. Cenk Uygur is also a prominent journalist.
Journalist.
The Young Turks.
Young Turks, genau. Hat auch ähnliche Sachen gesagt, muss ich sagen.
Young Turks, exactly. He has said similar things, I must say, even though he is a Democrat. Corruption. So corruption is legal in the USA, in politics. And that actually connects. So what you just said, that naturally connects the two parties. I don't want to say too much about it now, because a lot is said about it in the film. This aspect, this phenomenon, is really well portrayed by various people, and the viewers will see that too. And I would say that what connects the Republicans and the Democrats is firstly corruption, and secondly, foreign policy.
Und zweitens die Außenpolitik. Chess Freeman ist ja, von außen sieht das jetzt eigentlich.
Jess Freeman, from the outside it might seem that Trump would conduct foreign policy quite differently, but we'll see. However, Chess Freeman, a very important and experienced foreign policy expert and diplomat, believes that there won't actually be any major differences. Of course, during the campaign, you can say anything until you win. Then we'll see. But I would say these issues definitely connect the two parties, as well as economically.
Diese Sachen verbinden die beiden Parteien auf jeden Fall, aber auch wirtschaftlich. Also
So when it comes to the economy of the USA or internal matters, of course both parties belong to the establishment. Norbert Finkes described this very well. These donors who are donating now, you can also see this on the websites, the companies, for example. They basically donate to both parties. So a company, for example, donates 50 to one party, the same amount to the other party. So they are essentially supporting both parties. That's why it is indeed, as you described earlier, that is the establishment.
Jetzt vielleicht noch zum Abschluss einfach auch über die
Now maybe to conclude, let's talk about the perspective of your film. It's essentially an outsider's view of the USA. On my English channel, many people from the USA will watch it. Then people who see this film from the USA will see how you, as a German Turk, and how people from Turkey view and assess the USA. What do you think? How do Europeans, like Turkey, Europe and so on, currently see the USA? How is it perceived by us?
Und so weiter, die USA im Moment. Wie wird sie bei uns wahrgenommen?
Also zunächst mal zum ersten Punkt. Ich muss sagen.
First of all, regarding the first point, I have to say, of course, we are critical. Everyone must be critical. We have tried to observe this critically. But I have to say I find that everything has become very, very factual. So I also try in our media work, which I might not have mentioned at the beginning, but media work nowadays is very much intertwined with, definitely in the world, with propaganda. And I mean, everyone has a perspective. And bringing that in is legitimate. That's not a problem.
Und dass man das einbringt, ist ja auch legitim. Ist kein Problem. Aber man sollte definitiv versuchen.
But one should definitely try, and that's what's actually missing, I think, at the moment, to be as factual and informative as possible. And that's why I would say perspective. We really tried to stay factual. That's the first thing. Secondly, I think that when you look from the outside, and by the way, I also asked Professor Emmanuel Ness this question. What he answered I won't say now, but I would say how people observe from the outside has changed. So how do Europeans observe, as you asked, or people here in Turkey or from other countries, how do they observe the USA? Firstly, with concern, I would say.
Erstens mit Bedenken, würde ich sagen. Und zweitens mit nicht mehr so viel.
And secondly, with not so much, what word should I use now? maybe not so much with respect or fear. So not so much that the big brother, but this imagination is over, I think. And that basically shows what we have been experiencing for about 15 years. And that means, in conclusion, as Norman Finkelstein really described well, he said in the documentary you will see, it is undeniable that the USA has been in decline for some time. So there's no need to discuss that anymore. Exactly, it is in a downturn, and that is indeed a fact. And what that brings, what it leads to, is another topic altogether.
Was das bringt, wozu das führt, das ist nochmal ein anderes Thema.
Das nehme ich an. Ich hoffe, ihr werdet das aufgreifen und
I assume so. I hope you will take it up and continue to work on it. I am very much looking forward to this documentary. Thank you for making it and for allowing us to publish it. For people who want to follow your work in English, where should they do that? Where can they find you, and where is the best place to find Harici?
Wo findet man dich und wo findet man Harici am besten?
Ja, nochmal zum Abschluss danke, dass du uns auch die Gelegenheit...
Yes, once again, thank you for giving us the opportunity. Our website is www.harici.com, and there you can also click on the English version of the website in the top right corner, of course. As mentioned, we have Turkish and English publications.
Anklicken natürlich. Wir haben, wie gesagt, türkische und englische Publikationen.
Gut, alle zusammen, wenn ihr der Englisch...
All right, everyone. If you are proficient in English or Turkish, go to harici.com, follow Tunç Akkoç and his team, and look forward to the documentary Awakening from the Dream, which we will broadcast here in the coming days. Tunç, thank you for your time today. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Tunç, vielen Dank für deine Zeit heute.
Okay, Dankeschön.